Goeiemôre aan die elkeen. Geseënde Sabbat. Ons is vanoggend baie bevoorreg vir 'n spesiale program vandag. Na die aanloop van die week wat leraar Maatjie by ons was, van Woensdag aand af, het hy vir ons gevra of hy vir ons die Sabbatskool program ook kan neem. Vanoggend, daar is graag ietsie wat hy ook met ons wil deel. En ons het vir hom gesê, natuurlik, enige tyd. So vanoggend is ons bevoorreg dat leraar Mike vir ons die Sabbatskool gaan waarneem. Maar voordat ons in die program ingaan, kom ons open met 'n gebed. Bid saam met my. Liewe Here, ons dankie vir die voorreg van aanbidding. Ons dankie vir die voorreg wat ons voor U kan kom, gemeenskaplik en saam U naam kan aanroep. Liewe Here, dat ons U kan loof en prys as ons skepper en as ons God. Ons verlosser wat vir ons die prys betaal het en ons uit genade red. Liewe Here, ons kom vanoggend as 'n gemeente voor U en ons aanbid U omdat U ons God is, liewe Here. En daarom kan ons nie hierdie diens voortsit sonder U teenwoordigheid nie. En ons vra U asseblief om nou U Heilige Gees oor ons uit te stort, om in elkeen van ons se harte te vul, om ons ontvanklik te maak vir die woord en die boodskap wat U met ons gaan deel, deur die lippe van leraar Michael. En liewe Here, wees asseblief ook met hom as U spreekbuis. Gebruik hom asseblief as 'n magtige spreekbuis vir die koninkryk, liewe Here, om heling te vind, te gee vir ons in hierdie besonderse moeilike wêreld, waar pyn en smart en lyding en rou deel is van ons lewens, liewe Here, alhoewel U dit nie vir ons bestem het nie. Maar liewe Here, wees asseblief nou met ons hierdie diens. Dis ons nederige gebed in Jesus naam. Amen. Ek gaan nou ons diaken en diakones na vore nooi om vir ons die offergawe op te neem. Dankie. Ek nooi U wat kan om saam met my te kniel vir die gebed. Indien U nie kan kniel nie, is U welkom om net te bly sit in die bank. Liewe Here, ons dankie vir die voorreg wat ons het om 'n dankoffer aan U terug te bring. Liewe Here, dat ons uit ons dankbaarheid van ons harte aan U kan gee wat tot die opbouing van die koninkryk kan wees. En liewe Here, ons vra U asseblief om ons te lei om hierdie befondsing te gebruik tot die verheerliking van die koninkryk, om die mense in hierdie wêreld en hierdie gemeenskap te kan ondersteun, om U hande en voete te wees in hierdie gemeenskap. En liewe Here, ons dink ook aan hulle wat nie vandag hier kan wees nie, hulle wat deur 'n moeilike tyd gaan, hulle wat hartseer het, hulle wat pyn en lyding het. En ons vra U asseblief om ook vir hulle genesing te gee. Liewe Here, waar ons ook nou woord van bemoediging van leraar Michael gaan kry. Vra ons asseblief dat U ons verder sal vat in die gemeenskap in, om U hande en voete te wees. Liewe Here, is ons nederige gebed nou in Jesus naam. Amen. Ek gaan nou vir leraar Mike na vore nooi om hier by my aan te sluit. Ek dink vir baie van ons het hy nie 'n bekendstelling nodig nie, maar vir u wat hom dalk nou vir die eerste keer ontmoet vanoggend, leraar Mike Smit is 'n leraar by ons in die konferensie en hy bedien ook by Witbank kliniek waar hy sy nagraadse studies voortsit. Hy is getroud met 'n pragtige vrou, iemand wat ook groot impak in my persoonlike lewe gemaak het, Candy. Sy was een van my sielkunde lektore gewees toe ek gestudeer het. En die Here het hulle geseën met 2 pragtige kinders, met Noah, hulle seentjie, en Alana, hulle dogtertjie, wat nou 6-7 maande is. Ek vergeet. 8 maande, daar is ek alweer 'n maand uit. Maar ja, so as julle sien hy lyk so 'n bietjie moeg en uitgeput, dan verstaan julle, hy kry ook nie slaap in die aande nie. Ja. Maar die Here seën hom hierdie week, dat hy goeie rus gekry het, en hy het ons baie goed bedien deur die week, en ook vir vandag, waar hy ons nou 'n boodskap gaan bring, en dan 11 uur met ons erediens, en dan na ete vanmiddag, gaan ons ook 'n middagprogram hê, waar hy ons die finale boodskap gaan bring. Dankie leraar Mike, ons waardeer jou bediening.
Ja, baie dankie. Goeiemôre almal. Hoe gaan dit? Julle die week survive? Julle is hierso? Okay. Party van ons is hierso, maar ons is nog nie eintlik hierso nie. En dis okay ook. Alright, soos wat Jan gesê het, ek is Mike Smit. Ek is nie groot op titels nie. So as jy my Mike wil noem, is dit ook okay. Ek is 'n predikant in ons kerk hierso, of nie hierso nie, maar vir 'n hele paar jaar nou. Alhoewel ek eintlik maar nog 'n nuwe Adventist is. Ek dink daar's mense hierso wat baie langere Adventist al was as wat ek is in my lewe. Maar die Here voel ek het my geroep in bediening in so 'n paar jaar gelede. En ek dink, Jan, wanneer het jy gegradueer? Wanneer het ons gegradueer? Ek dink 2015 het ek gegradueer by Helderberg. En daarna is ek Bethlehem toe, en ek het in Bethlehem vir 'n hele paar jaar, was ek die predikant daar in Vicksburg en Senekal en Bethlehem. Ek dink julle ken miskien so 'n paar mense van Bethlehem Kerk ook af. Ken julle iemand van Bethlehem af? Okay, julle bly net hierso. Okay. Julle moet 'n bietjie travel. Alright. En so ek was 'n predikant daar gewees, en toe nadat ek weg is by Bethlehem, het ek toe was ek predikant by 'n kerkie in Pretoria Wes, en ek het ook by Witbank kliniek begin werk. Nou ek dink meeste van ons weet, Witbank kliniek is 'n psigiatriese hospitaal daar in Centurion, en so mense met depressie en bipolêr en angs en skizofrenie en al daai tipe goeters gaan Witbank toe. En my werk daarso is om die geestelike aspek van daardie mense te verstaan en daai geestelike aspek aan te spreek of hulle te help daarmee, want wanneer ons deur moeilike tye gaan, affekteer dit ons geestelikheid baie. Dis 'n gedeelte waar ons gaan praat vanoggend hierso, en ek gaan in 'n oomblik oorskakel in Engels in. My brein kan nie mooi tussen die twee gaan altyd nie. So as ek so nou en dan begin hakkel, dan weet jy my brein het 'n error ontgaan. Ek weet nie ek is die regte woord vir dit nie, maar ja. So Woensdag aand, toe ek die eerste aand hierso was, het ons gepraat oor understanding grief. We just focus on no, we didn't even do that. Wednesday night we spoke about, from a biblical perspective, what is it that makes grief so hard? And we spoke about how God has made us for connection. God made us to attach. The whole of creation was good except one thing, and that was that man should be alone. And so God never made us to be alone, and He never made us to especially to attach to somebody and have our whole life be intertwined with them just to have it ripped apart again. And so when we are grieving, it's really a reaction from a genetic place. Why we react in that way when something bad happens to us, when we lose that person that we love. And then Thursday night, we spoke about understanding grief, and our plan was to talk about what does grief look like, and then also what does the path towards healing look like for a person. And we never got to that. Ons het nie tyd gehad nie, en toe het ons gesê, okay, ons gaan daai tweede gedeelte vat. What does the path to healing look like? And we're going to do that at Sabbatskool today. So hierdie is nie 'n Bybelse boodskap wat ons gaan preek vir jou, en nou gaan jy 'n paar preke kry vandag, en jy gaan moeg wees dat mense vir jou preek nie. Nee, hierdie eerste gedeelte is net 'n continuation of what we were talking about. And so it's going to sound a little bit more psychological than theological. Is ons okay daarmee? Gaan ons dit maak? Ek het dit een keer in 'n kerk gedoen, en toe's die een tannie baie kwaad. Want sy het nie geweet die program gaan gebeur nie, en sy het gekom kerk toe vir 'n Bybelstudie. En toe het dit nou nie gebeur, en toe sy baie kwaad en ongelukkig daaroor. So ek noem dit maar nou net vir julle voor die tyd. Okay, so that's what we're going to do now. Then at the divine service, we're going to have a sermon proper, and the title of that sermon would have been, Why Hast Thou Forsaken Me? But I just feel impressed to preach something else, and that is going to be a sermon entitled, Where Are You, Jesus? Where Are You, Jesus? And we are going to look at the experience of a family that lost somebody that they needed a lot. Okay. And then this afternoon, we're going to have lunch. And then after lunch, what happens? Before you sleep, what happens after lunch? After lunch, we're going to have another session here. And in this session, for the strong among us, for the remnant among the remnant that can make it to the afternoon one, don't feel pressured. But if you can make it, we are going to talk about emotionally healthy spirituality. We want to look at what are the spiritual components of us and how that interacts with our brains psychologically. And we want to talk about the things in church that make us healthier, and also the things in church that can make you more sick. All right, including the pastor. Where's the pastor? Okay, he's not here. We can talk about him. Okay, all right, I'm just kidding. So we have had a prayer already, and so let us get started. Even though this is not a Bible study, I wanted to open with a scripture. En het julle julle Bybels hierso? Kan iemand vir ons asseblief Openbaring 21 vers 1 tot 4 lees? Openbaring 21 vers 1 tot 4. As julle sien, ek is so op my foon, ek WhatsApp nie mense nie. Okay. Ek is maar nou deel van die generasie wat begin oorskakel. Okay. Oh, dis op die skerm. Alright, dankie. So Openbaring 26. Nou weet ek nie of moet ek iemand nou vra om dit te lees nie, maar dit is nou op die skerm al klaar. So kom ek lees vir ons. En ek het 'n nuwe hemel en 'n nuwe aarde gesien, want die eerste hemel en die eerste aarde het verbygegaan, en die see was daar nie meer nie. Hoekom nie? Wat's fout met die see? Wie van julle hou van die see? Ek doen. Hoekom is daar nie meer see nie? Hey? Chosen ones. So he's talking about a time when he will bring justice to this earth. For his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night, will he keep putting them off? I tell you, Jesus says, he will see that they get justice and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? The question is almost, I am going to bring justice to them. I'm going to make sure that every single person, my chosen ones that deserve justice, I will get them justice. But he almost says this a bit of an afterthought, but I wonder how many of them will be able to hold on until then. I wonder how many of them will still have hope and faith by the time that I come. Because he knows that for you to go through these things breaks your faith down. It's very hard to have a genuine faith when you go through difficult life circumstances. You have a lot of questions, and we'll speak more about that as we carry on here. So the question is, how can we start dealing with these things, or with grief at least, in a healthy way? And the first thing that we can do is to remove the barriers of grieving from ourselves and from other people. What barriers do you think we have to grieving in a healthy way? What would you say? Ek weet, is vroeg in die oggend. Julle het nie gekom om te praat nie, julle het gekom om te luister en nou vra die ou vrae. Is irriterend, but just be with me. Okay, try to interact with me. What barriers do you think people usually cause for you in your grief? Have people made it more difficult for you to grieve sometimes? Yes or no? Yes? Okay, all right. Can you give an example of that? Why? Because of their reaction, right? Okay, so we as people are very bad at dealing with the negative emotions of others. We don't like it. When we see somebody cry, many of you who are especially very sensitive to other people's emotions, you automatically get very uncomfortable. When you see that person cry, oh no, I need to go and stop them. So now you're going to go and sit there and say, hey, it's okay, be strong. You want them to stop crying. It's very hard for you to just sit there with them and to let them cry, and if I can use these words, to go crazy. When people go crazy, we don't like that. Right? So when our little 4-year-old freaks out and cries, and we think like, why are you even crying? We tell them, stop crying, man. Ever done that to a child? Yes. Okay. Stop crying. Why are you crying for? Okay. And so we want to stop them from crying because it's very, we don't know what to do with it. And many times we don't know really how to help them. So we just want to stop the emotion, the thing that's causing us discomfort. And so oftentimes we will stop expressing ourselves because we are scared of how other people might react to that. And now we are not just carrying our own burden, but we are carrying their burden as well. And so now we are carrying extra burdens. And so not only that, but sometimes when we express emotion to other people, they say not the smartest things in the world. I remember at Helderberg, I lived with this lady who lost her husband to Alzheimer's. And, when she was grieving, people would come to the house and visit her, and pastors and friends and all of that. And after that time passed, and me and her, we were sitting in the lounge one day talking, and she said to me, Michael, can I just give you one piece of advice for when you are a pastor one day? Okay. When you are visiting somebody who is grieving, don't say stupid things. Like, how are you? I mean, you know how I am. I just lost the most important person in this world to me, and you're asking me, how are you? Like, come on, what's wrong with you? And people can say the worst things. They think that they might be helping, but they say things that are really unhelpful. And this is also a cue for you. When you are talking to those people, don't say those things. Rather be quiet. She said to me, rather shut up. That was her words. Okay? Then what you say something that is not going to help this person. Can I give you an example of what people have said? From the people that I've counseled, one lady who lost her 2-year-old daughter. Okay? You know what the people in a church told her? You are young. You can have another daughter. Hey? How does that feel for that mother to hear that from the people that should support her. But the thing that they are saying is almost blasphemous. It's repugnant. It's ugly. It shows so little human understanding to say that to a person. Or when you lose a husband or a wife, and what is the first thing people say to you, especially if you are younger, hey? Yeah, you can marry again, man. No, but are you out of your mind? I'm not even thinking about having another child or a husband. Okay, and now people are saying that to me already. Another lady, she moved with her husband to the Eastern Cape. He found a good job there, and so they moved to the Eastern Cape. And just after they got there, suddenly the husband got sick and died. Okay, and so the lady reached out to the pastor and the pastor's wife. Not a reflection on you guys, okay? But they reached out to the pastor and the pastor's wife, and do you know what the pastor and his wife told her? It's because it was not in God's will for you to move to the Eastern Cape that he has died. That was their words. He died because you were not following God's will. These are the kinds of things that people say to each other. And some of them think that they are doing a good thing, but they end up hurting more than anything else. This becomes especially important when we deal with things like disenfranchised grief. Do you remember what that is from our first night? Disenfranchised grief, that is where the kind of relationship that you had is not socially sanctioned. And so your right to grieving is taken away. So let's take, for instance, in a case where you were having an affair with somebody else. Now, I know that you are Adventists, and Adventists do not sin, but let's imagine for a second, I'm being sarcastic, by the way. Some of you are getting, I just need to say it sometimes because some people don't get my sarcasm. They're thinking I'm serious. All right? So, one lady, for instance, she had an affair with this man. She was the other woman in the relationship. Okay? And then this man left his wife for her, and then they were together. And then he left her for another woman. It broke her life into two pieces. And she had nobody to grieve with because people would tell her what? What did you expect? And so she had no platform to grieve. And that made her more sick as well. We find this with some relationships like that. If there's maybe a sexuality issue where the person was gay and now he had a gay relationship, and that person leaves or dies, and that person has no platform to actually express what they are going through because they are not allowed to have that relationship. In suicide, we find the same thing as well. We don't want to talk about it anymore because of the reactions or what we expect the way that people will react as well. Right? And so when we have cases like that, it can sometimes stop us from experiencing or dealing with the grief in a good way. Another barrier that we sometimes have is giving ourselves permission to grieve. I find this a lot. We don't give ourselves permission to grieve. How often have you told yourself, I need to be strong for the other person? Have you ever done that to yourself? I need to be strong for that person. It's fascinating that everybody's saying that. I don't know who they are being strong for because everybody's trying to be strong for everybody. And everybody's thinking that they are the person that's being strong for the other one. But really what they are doing is that they are modeling a way of grieving where we don't show emotions and where we just suppress. We are not allowed to cry in front of each other and really be honest about what we are dealing with here. So, giving yourself permission to grieve. How often do I see people, and you know this box of tissues over here, I've got a whole drawer full of this. So this is my tool I use the most in counseling, is this box of tissues that I brought with. And as soon as somebody takes one of these things out of that, the first word that they say is what? Sorry. They have just lost, like this one woman, she lost her husband to suicide, her father died, and she has got some other personal issues as well, financially, and she is apologizing for crying about that. I want you to think about how ridiculous that actually is, that we have to apologize just for expressing our emotions. And we get conditioned to do that from young age, especially men, right? So when a little boy hits his knee on the ground here and he's hurting, what do we tell the boy? Hey? Yeah, big boy, man, don't cry. Hey? We tell him, hey, stop crying, man, you're a big boy. Why? Because I need to go work. I don't have time to deal with your emotions, right? Or I don't know how to, it makes me uncomfortable, and so I try to stop him. And so from a young age, people are conditioned to suppress because they're not allowed to actually express. And the biggest gift you can also give yourself when you're grieving is to give yourself permission to exist as a human being. You are allowed to exist. And you are allowed to exist just the way that you are in your emotions. And if you are going through life and you are having to cry and cry and cry and scream and hit something, okay, not another person, but something, okay, then you do that. If you cannot express your emotion, you end up bottling all of it up here. And my colleague had a very nice thing that he did to kind of show what happens to that. So he was climbing there was like a mountain or a hill with the fountains that they have on the top. I don't know exactly where that was. And so him and his wife was there on the mountain, and the fountain was, it comes out of the ground, just bottles out like that, right? And so he wanted to kind of test this and see what happens if I close this hole where the water is coming out. And so he's now stepping on that, and it's quite easy. But as soon as he steps on that, guess what happens? Hey? It comes out somewhere else. And then he steps on that hole, and then it comes out somewhere else. And eventually he's like playing Twister there on the mountain, and he's asking his wife, come and give a hand here so that we can close these holes. But no matter how many holes you close or try to stop down, it eventually always comes up in some other way. And many of us, we have, buried that grief and buried that sadness, and it comes up in things like anger issues. We think that we have anger issues, but actually it's depression that is just starting to manifest in that. And the problem with that is now I make the anger issue a spiritual thing. I've got anger issues because I'm not following God in the right way, where in fact I actually just have depression, and if I dealt with the depression, then it would help with the anger issues. Okay? And so giving yourself permission to grieve is very important. And here's a third one, and this is a difficult one. It's called privilege. What's privilege? Hey? No, that's just a translation. What is privilege? Use it in a sentence. Sounds like we are at a spelling bee. Okay? So privilege is where you have the opportunity and the ability that other people don't have, right? Many of us don't always have the privilege of grieving like we are supposed to be grieving. And we might be a mother who just lost her husband, okay? And you might not have the time or the opportunity to grieve properly because you are just trying to survive. You're just trying to cope. And what if you can't afford to see a psychologist and other people can, right? Or you can't see a counselor, other people can. You can't go to a doctor, but other people can. And so we have different sets of privileges. And sometimes we don't have the privilege to just break down and cry because life moves on. And it doesn't care if we are ready or not. Is that true? Unanswered questions. When something like grief happens, it's very possible that we have a lot of unanswered questions, especially towards God or about our spirituality or our religion. And sometimes we don't feel in church, and this is something that the pastor can work on, right? In the church, people don't always feel like they have a platform to question their beliefs. Am I right? Okay. When we come into the church, Adventist people are very good in the evangelistic meetings to say, hey, don't just listen to what other people tell you. Think for yourself. Question things. Don't just listen to your pastor, but question what you are going through and then make a decision for yourself. And then when we come into the church, it sometimes is as if those privileges now disappear, where now we are expected to stay within the doctrine and not question too much. And for those people who are questioning and say, yeah, but I don't agree with what you are saying, there's not always a very good welcoming committee standing at the door for them. In fact, it's one of the reasons that you can be disciplined in the church, is if you disagree with the doctrine. Am I right or am I wrong? You can bring the church manual and show me. But I know that I'm right. And so we need to create safe spaces in our churches for people that are questioning, for people that are thinking about their faith, because that's not necessarily a bad thing if we have questions. It means we are thinking people. And it is an opportunity for us to actually grow a more robust faith. You know, when I became an Adventist, my brother, I shared with him some things, and then in his own time, he went onto the internet, and if you want to find bad things about the Adventist church on the internet, it's very easy to do that, or about any church really. And so he was looking at all of these things, and he came with me with a big stack of notes like this, and he said, I have a problem with this. Okay. Now, our normal way of responding is not very positive to that. But I said to him, okay, thank you. Give me this. Can I go through this? Didn't try to answer him immediately. I said, I don't know the answers to this. Can you give me some time to just look at this and read through this? And then I started working through that thick set of notes, page for page for page, for line for line for line, and really listening and investigating and questioning myself on these things. And guess what happened a few months later? My faith was more robust than it had ever been, because I was allowed to question, think, read, and make up my own mind. But when we take that privilege away from people, we take a privilege away for them to grow and become more robust in their faith. And let me tell you something. When grief hits you and you don't respond to that opportunity, you end up with a belief system that is not capable of holding the current experience that you have. We are going to speak more about that this afternoon when we speak about that healthy belief system. Okay. But you have to take that opportunity. It's good for you. You can read books like this. This is a good book to read. It's written by an Adventist scholar called John Peckham. He's a very good theologian, and he writes about the theodicy of love. You know what theodicy means? Come, Jan is going to give you a chocolate if you know the answer to this, okay? Amen. Okay, so who's going to say, what is theodicy? Now you're nervous. No? You owe Jan a chocolate? That's theology. It also has the same theo. So theo means God. Any theos in here? Okay. All right. Theo, it's God. And D says it actually comes from the Latin word for justice. Okay? And it's or to judge. And so what this word actually means is judging God. Okay. Because when we are going through difficult times, we've got all these questions to God. And so God becomes the one that is actually on trial. And don't think that there's anything wrong with that. That's a fundamental belief of Adventism. It's a great controversy that some things happened in heaven. And what is happening on earth is not just about us. Jesus on the cross is not just about you and your salvation. It's about the whole great controversy and the cosmic conflict that there is about the character of God. Is he actually somebody that we can trust? And when we read these books and we work through these things, we can learn, we have the opportunity to learn for ourselves in a very deep and meaningful way that I can actually trust him. If you don't have that emotional trust, I'm not talking about a belief trust, like a fundamental belief, we believe in Jesus and whatever. I believe in an emotional trust where you feel that you trust that person. The lower that emotional trust goes, we're going to talk more about this afternoon, the higher something else goes, and that something else is called negative religious coping. And it's one of the best predictors for mental health issues, especially anxiety, right? Where we are now going to interpret life events very negatively. See, I must move on. Don't ask me to come again because I don't stick to the time. Okay. So those difficult questions, very important. And then sometimes the difficult decisions that we have to make. We've got very difficult decisions to make in life when somebody dies. If you want to see a family start fighting, wait for the death to come. Yeah? When the will comes out and now we must discuss how this person has left things. And now we start fighting about every little thing that you are getting and I'm not getting, and why are you making this decision? Why did you ask that guy to preach at the funeral? I don't want him to preach. I want my pastor to preach there. And so there's all of these fights start happening. And maybe if it was your husband that died and he used to make all of the financial decisions, now as the woman with no experience doing that, you have to make huge financial decisions sometimes. Should I sell this place or do that and do that? And many people can't even deal with that. It becomes overwhelming for them, and they struggle to deal with their grief purely because of the major decisions that's blocking them from moving forward as well. And so the decisions that come, these are all barriers to grieving that we can experience. So what does the path to recovery look like? How long should it take for you to become well after you've lost somebody? What's the minimum and maximum? Sorry? As long as it takes? Okay. Who else? Come, give me, what do you think? What is an appropriate amount? Because you're saying as long as it takes. But you are also the person that gets irritated with that person who has grieved for 5 years and they have not moved on yet. And you are the one that then asks them, how long are you going to be sad about this? Am I right? Okay. So this is a very difficult thing because we just don't know. Because every person is different. And the kind of relationship they had was different. And there are so many different small things that can affect the whole lot of grief, right? So if the kind of relationship you had, if you were the caregiver, was there conflict in the relationship? If there was conflict in the relationship, you're going to struggle with more guilt and struggle more to grieve properly. And so there's a lot of these small things that we have to deal with as well. And so how long should it be? Well, we don't know. But what is important is that you are able to recognize when you are getting stuck somewhere. And you can do that. Many of you, if you have this feeling that, I'm still grieving, I feel personally like I should have moved past this already, but I feel like I'm getting stuck somewhere. That is usually a red flag for complicated grief as well. Okay, or it could be a red flag for complicated grief. When you yourself feel, I should have been much further, but I'm getting stuck somewhere. And in that case, you will need professional help. And so when you are going to go and get professional help, let's say you're going to go to a psychologist. When it comes to complicated grief, or intensive grief therapy, that's usually about 6 to 12 weeks, depending on you and the person that is helping you. And it's very important that you know, when you go and see that psychologist, you have to tell them that for the next 8 to 12 weeks, we are just going to focus on grief. Because if you don't do that, psychologists are just going to let you talk about whatever you want to talk, right? If you tell them, I want to work just on my grief, then they know, okay, this is what the person wants, because they are very respectful in that manner, and we're going to just focus on that grief therapy. And that grief therapy will cover a host of things. And usually for you to recover from grief, there are 4 things that you have to get good at. Okay? And this is the last things that we're going to mention here. So we can finish at past, and then have a break, and then we're going to come back at 11 o'clock for today's sermon. What's the sermon title? If you get it right, Jan is going to give you a chocolate. All right? Where are you, Jesus? And that's going to be our title today. But the first thing that people need to become good at, and by the way, as I mentioned, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, it doesn't have to happen in that sequence. And when you work with somebody with this, you can choose whichever one you want to work at, because as you get better at one, it increases the whole lot. Okay? And so the first one that I want to mention here is called accepting the reality of the loss. This is where many of us get stuck. We either do not want to accept that this thing has happened, and so we live in a denial that this has happened, and sometimes the brain helps us with that, and it makes us feel like we are dreaming, right? We spoke about that also on Thursday night. You may feel like you are in a dream. This is not real. Any moment, that person's going to come through the door there and say that, hey, here I am, and life can go back to what it was. And so sometimes we struggle to accept the loss. That's a blockage for us. But not just the reality of what happened, but sometimes we deny the meaning of what has happened. And so we downplay the significance of this thing and just how much this thing has killed us, if I can use that language. Like one church member that I had, okay? Guess what she says every time we see her on a Sabbath? What is the saying that Adventists like to use? Okay, happy Sabbath, that's one. So how are you, sister? What would you say to that? If I said, hey, how are you? Oh, God is good. God is good. He gives us strength every day. And while that may be true that God is good, when we say those things and we do those things, we are trying to minimize, and I know this was in her case as well the case, that she was trying to minimize what she was going through. She doesn't want to admit just how much this thing has actually impacted her. And then 10 years, 12 years later on, as with one of the church members that I had, a song comes up, a hymn, and it was that person's favorite hymn. And then 12 years later, for the first time, that person breaks down. And now it's really difficult to deal with because it's very deeply buried, and the support system that should have been there is not there anymore. Because 12 years later, they've all moved on. They've dealt with it. But you haven't. And now those people that you want to grieve with are no longer there. And grieving with the people that we love is very, very important. Okay? They've done studies on where they've taken, or they look at people that lost somebody. And if, let's say, you're a student and you don't live at home, you live in Bloemfontein. Let's say you go to study in Bloemfontein. I don't know why you would want to do that. It's in the middle of nowhere. This is Middelburg, so it's basically the same. But that's in the middle of nowhere, right? And you go and study there, and your family is here. If it so happens that somebody you love dies, and you stay there and grieve, and you don't come back to your family to grieve, what they found is that those people struggle more with grieving because they are not among the people that can support them and cry with them through this. And so being with the people is very important. What are some things that we can do to help us to accept the loss? Well, one of the things that we can do is to talk about the memories of that person. It's very hard when you don't have that feeling and other people have the loss and they want to talk about that person all the time. Sometimes it can feel to you as if it's too much. Okay, and some of you would want to say to them, can we just not talk about that person for 5 minutes? But that person that is grieving needs to talk about that person that they've lost. They need to share the memories of that person that they love so much. And when they do that, it's a very therapeutic thing that happens for them. Allow each other to talk about the people that you've lost. Even if it's hard, let that person share with you. If it's a beautiful memory, if it's a negative memory, let them share with you what they are going through. Another one is not just to talk about the memories of that person, but it's to talk about what it was like on that day when you received the phone call and they said to you, "Are you Mrs. So-and-so? We just came here upon an accident and it's your husband. He was in a car accident. He's not alive anymore." And to speak to a person and allow them to talk about what were those moments like? Where were you? It's called debriefing. And, when we hear that person, that phone call, or we see them take the last breath, or we see the death happening, it can be very traumatic. And we need to talk about that traumatic event, to go through it. What did I see? What did I hear? What did I smell? What was it like there in that moment? And as we talk about that, reality becomes more a part of our belief system as well, because we are speaking that reality. Can you see how that brings in the reality of the loss? Okay? And another one is, I know some of you like cremation, but there's people tend to find it easier if there's a grave site, a burial place where I can go to, I can take some flowers and speak to that person, even though you'd believe that they are sleeping. It's okay, all right? Whether or not you talk to them will not change whether they're sleeping or not. Okay. They won't wake up, like that is to say. So for you to go to the graveyard and to visit the grave helps your brain to start coming into the place that, hey, this has happened. This is real. And there are many ways that we can try to keep somebody alive. Okay? One of those things is just by repeating things. One woman who lost her husband and her son in one accident, she would walk through the house and just say, "I will not have you dead, I will not have you dead, you are not dead." That was what she repeated the whole day through because she couldn't deal with that loss. Okay? She couldn't come to accept that because it was too painful. And so she's trying to give herself a different reality. Some of us will want to, what they call, mummify the person. And so we will keep their room exactly the way that they left it. We don't want to touch it. Okay? And so in a sense, we are trying to keep them alive. Right? And these things can be helpful for some time as we learn to deal with it, but eventually it can become full-on denial where we don't even want to accept that this person has died. Okay? Are we still okay? How are you doing? Okay, give me 2 more minutes. Okay. All right, so number 2, processing the pain. As we spoke about, there are some, very common emotions that we experience: anger, guilt, anxiety, and what was the other one? Sadness, of course. All right, and so those are the big emotions that we usually experience. And how do I process emotions? How do I do that? Hey? By just suppressing them, hey? You just put them down and try not to think about it. No. All right? You need to allow yourself to feel the emotion. Remember that song that my son likes? We're going on a lion hunt. Right? That one where it says, we can't get over it, we cannot get under it, we're just going to have to go through it. And the emotions of grief is the same way. You have to allow yourself to feel the pain of those emotions. The pain will get less if you allow yourself to feel that. You need to talk about it. Some of you need to also express it in some way. So get yourself a boxing bag. And because if you don't like talking so much, right? If you are one of those men, for instance, that don't like to talk about your emotions, if somebody asks you, how are you? Or if your wife asks you, how do you feel about this? Immediately you get angry. You ever had that before? It's showing that you don't know how to speak about emotions, right? And so if you can't do that, find something that works for you. Get a boxing bag. Baksla that thing. Get that anger out and express it in some way. Some of us, we can journal about it, and some of us can also try to then bring in also the positive emotions, because it's not all just negative. And sometimes we try to cut off the positive as well. Okay, number 3, quickly, adjusting. We have to adjust to the loss in some way. And there are 3 types of adjustments that you can do. Number 1 is an internal adjustment, because when that person dies, a big part of your identity is wrapped up in that person. And so you may feel like, who am I now after I have lost and loved this person? Who am I as an individual? There's also the external adjustments. So what are the practical things, the practical roles that this person did that they no longer have done? So it takes time for you to actually realize all the roles that that person has filled in your life. Usually the times after death that's the most difficult is about 3 months after the death and about a year after the death. So after 3 months you start realizing all of the gaps that that person has filled. They used to cut the lawn, they did the finances, they washed the dishes, they picked up the kids. That was a sexual partner. Okay? That's also an important part to talk about. Okay, so what do I do now? As a married person that I was used to having sex with my partner all the time, and now they are gone. What now? Do we have those discussions at church as well? Do you have somebody that you can talk to about that? Because that's an important part of you also. All right? And so with the external adjustments, you have to learn how to find a replacement for each of those things, even the sexual partner. Okay? Now, exactly how you're going to navigate that, it's going to be up to you. Okay? But you will need to fill that gap as well. Any kind of a gap that that person has left, you will need to adjust to that. All right? I want to say something now, but when we talk about sex, and then I'm going to say to you, some of the things that they used to do, you must learn to do yourself. Will just sound funny when I say it now, but it's true. You will need to learn to do some things like the finances. And by learning to do that yourself, you are empowering yourself and giving some sense of control back to you that you have lost in the death. It's very good for you to grow in that way. Okay? Thirdly, spiritual adjustments. This is the questions that we were talking about. We will speak more about that this afternoon. And then finally, moving forward, being able to make new happy memories while still keeping a legacy of this person. And so the point of grief is not to forget that person. It's not to make as if they didn't exist, but it is learning how to become a functioning human being again, while still keeping a memory of that person. And some of us, we don't want to give ourselves the right to move forward and to be happy again. Sometimes people say to me, you know what, I actually had a good day today, and I'm feeling so guilty about that. Am I allowed to be happy? It feels like I'm dishonoring that person by being happy. Or they, might, in a good instance, one lady found music. Her father was very good at music. And so a way for her to move forward and make new memories, but still keeping the legacy of her father alive, was to start writing music and playing music. And so you will need to find a way, a psychological place where you can put that person, but that will still allow you to make new memories and function as a human being in this world. Because again, the world doesn't stop for us. The world is merciless. It will just carry on. It doesn't care if you are ready or not. And that's unfortunately the reality. Okay, friends, I think for now it's fine. Jan, I see you want to come forward. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that these things that we've spoken about are informative and that they've helped you. There are other resources. If you need more resources about this, come and speak to me and I can guide you to some books that you can read. If you're not really talking to a person kind of a thing, you rather want to sit in a book and read that by yourself, then I can also help you to find some books that will be helpful. Thank you.
Baie dankie leraar Mike. Wie van u was geseënd gewees met hierdie inligting wat leraar Mike met ons kon gedeel het om ons te help om deur moeilike tye te gaan. En ons waardeer dit, dankie. Ons gaan nou ons slotlied saam sing en daarna gaan ons 'n breekie vat tot 11:00 toe. Daarso is ietsie om te drink en as u dalk ietsie wil eet, is daar ook ietsie ligs om te eet tot 11:00 toe. En maar voordat ons breek, kom ons sing net ons slotlied saam. Dankie. Here, ons dankie vir die groot voorreg wat ons het om meer van ons emosies te kan verstaan en veral van mekaar, liewe Here. En gebruik ons asseblief om tot 'n seëning te wees, liewe Here, vir mekaar. Om mekaar te kan ondersteun en bystaan in moeilike tye. Dis nou ons genederige gebed in Jesus naam. Amen.